Hi everyone, my name is Angie and welcome to my channel. Today I have a very interesting case to discuss, so let's jump right on in. Today's case is going to be on Ruth Thalia Sayas Sanchez. So Ruth Thalia was born 14 hours outside of the city of Lima in Peru in a very quiet countryside to her parents Leoncio and Vilma. And shortly after Ruth Thalia's birth, her sister Ava would follow. So when the girls were very young, Leoncio and Vilma decided to move closer to Lima to provide their daughters a better life, and they decided to settle on the village of Huachipa. Now, initially, Huachipa was a very agricultural community. It was just on the outskirts of Lima, but still sleepy and quiet. They had a nice countryside with some mountains. A lot of people would venture to Huachipa to get away from the city and the hustle and bustle. However, as Lima grew, they expanded outward. So Huachipa became this blend of kind of agricultural farmland and urban development. And some of the houses were not in the best conditions. The roads were in disrepair. It was common to see stray animals running here, there, everywhere, really. It kind of got lost with the blending of agricultural and urban. But Ruth Thalia's family was going to do whatever they had to provide a better life for themselves. Her parents would actually sell fruit to make ends meet when they first got there. And as time progressed, the family found their footing. Leoncio and Vilma owned their own glass shop. They also were in a band where she sang and he played the harp. Their daughters were happy. They had also had a son since they'd been in Huachipa, and things were starting to look up for them. Ruth Thalia was in university and she was also working at a call center. And like many young people, she was saving up money. Now, she had saved roughly the equivalent of $7,000 to put towards her dream of opening her own salon. She had an easy smile and was brave, funny, charismatic, and intelligent. And by outward appearances, she seemed like an average young woman. However, in July of 2012, people's perceptions of Ruth Thalia would drastically change. So a new reality show had arrived in Lima. Now, this show was known as El Valor de la Verdad, or The Value of the Truth. And the way the show worked is contestants would vet out these candidates. They would see if they were a good match for the show. Producers would go to a potential candidate's home and kind of follow them around, get to know them a little bit before they were invited into the studio if they were a good fit. Once they were in the studio, they would take a polygraph exam and their answers would be recorded. And then shortly after that, they were invited back to the studio, but this time they had to bring 3 guests with them, and they were going on in front of an audience. So the candidate would be asked questions in front of this audience and their 3 loved ones, and there were 21 questions total for a chance to win 50,000 sols, which is the equivalent of $20,000. The questions would start out easy and progressively get a little more tricky to put people in dicey situations, but the candidate always had the option to stop and walk away with whatever money that they had accumulated. So if you'd answered a question and the lie detector determined that you were telling the truth, you would win the money for that round. So leading this news show would be a very well-known Peruvian journalist by the name of Beto Ortiz, or more commonly, just Beto. He was that popular. He was also very controversial. He was described as being sharp, inquisitive, and funny, all of which were a great combination for a TV journalist, and he was actually named the most powerful TV journalist in Peru. When he was initially approached with the idea of El Valor de la Verdad, he jumped at the chance. You see, as a journalist, you have to dig to uncover the truth, but here it would come a little easier, and Beto was very intrigued with the format of the show. So the very first contestant on The Value of the Truth, as I'm going to be calling it from now on, was 19-year-old Ruth Thalia. And when Beto initially met her, he said that she seemed very average, that she was timid and low-key. However, a man by the name of David Novoa knew differently. David was the show's producer that had vetted Ruth Thalia. He went to her home, he dug into her background, and he knew that Ruth Thalia came with a story. So he would go on to help Beto determine the questions that she would be answering in front of her loved ones and the audience. And after the show aired, he said he felt terrible about what was revealed. As soon as the cameras turned on, Beto's impression of Ruth Thalia completely changed. Gone was this shy and timid girl, replaced with someone that was confident and charming and playful in front of the camera. Her sister Ava said that she loved being in front of a camera. She wanted to be famous, and she'd actually tried out for some soap operas in the past. So as per the rules of the show, Ruth Thalia had to invite 3 people, and she chose her mother and father, as well as a 20-year-old young man by the name of Brian Romero Leyva, who was her boyfriend at the time. Let's talk a little bit more about Brian. Now, Brian actually grew up on a sloping dirt road near Ruth Thalia's family's home. He was described by Beto as being kind of serious, resourceful, and a little bit shy. However, his mom would say that he was very warm and kind. For many years, he would wake up very early to help her sell breakfast plates to the workers at the market. Now, when he was just 8 years old, a man that his mother was seeing at the time pushed him down a flight of stairs, which caused him to have a stutter. He was very self-conscious about this, but he was trying to make the most of his life. He had a great relationship with his mom. He was renting a room within walking distance of her and seeing Ruth Thalia. He enjoyed spending time with his friends, and he worked as a taxi driver. So he was just trying to get on with life and the cards that had been dealt to him. So on the day of the taping, Ruth Thalia and her mother Vilma were very excited about the prospect of the show. Vilma thought that the questions would be about arriving in Lima, the struggles the family went through, the bullying that her daughters endured for not speaking the language at school, just basically their struggles and where they came from. And she was very proud of the obstacles they had overcome and didn't have anything to hide. She wanted people to hear her story and was excited that Ruth Thalia was being given this opportunity. However, her father, Leoncio, was a little more reserved. He was kind of nervous about what he would hear about his daughter, but he didn't want to hold her back from anything, so he agreed to go with her as one of her guests for the show. But notably, the person that was most anxious was Brian. He was extremely tense, and his right leg kept shaking, and when Beto asked him what's going on, he replied that he was very nervous to find out if Ruth Thalia had cheated on him. And everyone laughed at this, and Beto reminded him that it was only a game, and then the questions began. So the questions started innocently enough. Things like, have you ever skipped school without your parents' knowledge? Is it more important to be pretty or kind? If you found 1,000 souls, would you turn them in? And if you had gone a long time without taking a shower. The audience was all laughing. Everyone was having a good time. And then the questions turned to a little bit more invasive. Ruth Thalia would reveal that she had had a nose job. She didn't like her body. She wished she were white. She was very hesitant to answer if she thought Brian was handsome and smart, and she was a little bit ashamed of her parents at times. So while these questions were not the best to be revealing on TV in front of her family, I'm sure everyone can sympathize or even has experienced what Ruth Thalia did at one point in their lives. But the questions would get far worse. She would go on to say that she had taken the morning after pill 3 separate occasions, that she was only with her boyfriend Brian until someone better came along. She had fantasies about women, and she did not work at a call center like everyone thought, but rather danced at a nightclub. So at this point, Leoncio, Vilma, and Brian are all stunned. Vilma is begging her daughter to stop, But Ruth Thalia decides to continue on to question number 18. Have you ever had sex for money? Now, the studio is dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. So when Ruth Thalia whispers her answer, everyone in that audience heard it. And her reply was yes. She would go on to say that it only happened twice because they really needed the money. And with this answer, she won 15,000 souls, the equivalent of $5,300. This was approximately 10 months' wages for someone living in Lima. Now, Beto asked her if she would continue on to question number 19. She looked over at her parents and said that her family was the most important thing to her and begged for their forgiveness and decided that she was going to walk away with her 15,000 souls. So the show was taped in June of 2012 and would air on Saturday, July 12th of 2012. And during this time, things in the Sayas Sanchez home were less than ideal. Relations were extremely strained. Vilma was upset, Leoncio was quiet, and both parents were extremely confused. So Vilma eventually decided enough was enough. She was going to flat out ask her daughter why she had done this, and Ruth Thalia replied, "I did it for the money." So when the show aired, the situation became immensely worse. The Value of the Truth was a massive hit, as was their very first candidate, and initially Ruth Thalia was enjoying all this spotlight. She had filmed a morning show where she was very cheery and having a good time. She received her giant check like they do on game shows, and she thought that things would get better with time. She was feeling liberated. She had all of this stuff off of her chest, and to boot, she had $5,300 to put towards her dream of opening her salon. However, she would go on to sit down with Beto on his morning show, where she revealed that things weren't going as smoothly as she hoped they would. She looked tired and drawn on his show and revealed that she and Brian had actually broken up and that he should be more understanding of her situation because she was receiving backlash as well from all of this. Relatives were calling the family home and saying how disappointed they were with Ruth Thalia. The whole neighborhood was talking about her, and she'd actually confessed to her mom that at one point she thought of suicide. It was not only a trying time for Ruth Thalia, but Brian as well. When the show aired, Brian became the laughing stock in the neighborhood. He would go on to do some interviews where he said he was embarrassed and he couldn't forgive her for what happened. However, his revelations didn't stop there. He claimed that he and Ruth Thalia had actually broken up before the show, and he agreed to come on to help her out in exchange for some of her prize money. Now, Brian would say that Ruth Thalia still had not paid him and that the studio actually knew that he and Ruth Thalia had broken up, something to which Beto strongly denied. All the drama going on with Ruth Thalia and with Brian did not affect the show's ratings at all, however, and it was still in the #1 spot. People could not get enough of this show. But the real life drama was far from over. At one point, someone had broken into Ruth Thalia's family home and had stolen a laptop. Now, everyone kind of assumed that it was Brian, but nothing could really be proven. So Leoncio went down to the police station to file a report, and the matter was dropped. So according to Ava, Ruth Thalia's sister, Brian began asking for money. He started out wanting 500 souls and then upped it to 1,000 until eventually he got to 2,000. Until one day he showed up at the family home drunk, and Ava had actually answered the door. And he demanded his money. He said that Ruth Thalia still had not paid him for the favor that he did for her on the Value of the Truth by agreeing to go on to the show. And Ava was like, you know what, you just need to go home. You're drunk, come back tomorrow. I'll pay you myself, just to get him out of her sister's hair. And Ava said that Brian responded something very strange. He replied with, "Revenge is sweet," and then left. So on September 11th of 2012, Leoncio and Vilma were enjoying a quiet evening at home and wrapping up the night by watching a soccer game. Peru was actually playing Argentina. I believe it was in a World Cup qualifying match, but I can't be sure. But the family was trying to regain their footing after the events of the summer, and they were still trying to heal. Now, they were expecting to move on from this, but unfortunately, they were denied that opportunity. So when the couple woke up, Vilma actually looked at her husband and said that Ruth Thalia had not come home, and this was extremely unlike her. She would always return home or phone and let her parents know what was going on. So Vilma immediately reached out to her daughter Ava, who was actually away at this time. But Ava got on the phone to Ruth Thalia's friends immediately and began searching for her sister. Ava would receive a lead from a young man that said he saw Ruth Thalia outside of the university the night before, and she had gotten a call from Brian and had rushed off. So Vilma immediately ran to Brian's front door. She was crying and screaming and yelling at Brian to give her Ruth Thalia back. She knew that he had done something to her daughter. He said that he had no idea what she was talking about, that he actually hadn't talked to Ruth Thalia in quite a long time, and turned around and went back inside. So while Vilma was at Brian's, Leoncio was not sitting idly by. He actually went down to the police station to file a report on his daughter. But unfortunately in Huachipa, if you are not wealthy or famous or have some sort of connection, your case kind of just gets pushed to the back burner. But Leoncio would not be deterred by this. He was not taking no for an answer and went down to a television station. Here he actually encountered a producer for Beto's morning talk show called Open Your Eyes, and they told him if he came back in the morning, he could get on air and share his daughter's story. Then he went to another television station as well as a radio station after this, but with no luck. They were not going to tell his daughter's story to their consumers. So at this point, Ruth Thalia's parents are a mess. They are not sleeping. They're running over every single scenario that could have happened to their daughter. Now, around 5 a.m. on the morning of September 13th, they wake up, they're getting ready to go to be on Beto's show when they get a call from a producer that says, "Today is actually not a great day for us, but we can try and get you tomorrow or the day after that. Either way, we will give you a call when we are able to air Ruth Thalia's story," but they would not call back. So over the course of the next few days, Ruth Thalia's parents were going to numerous television stations trying to spread awareness about her story, but unfortunately no one wanted to pick it up. This is a very common theme in Peru. A lot of people go missing, and relatives will flock to the television stations to bring awareness to their loved one, but they can't or won't focus on these individuals. They won't even give them a time of day unless there is something unique about them. And initially, Vilma was very hesitant to reveal one crucial detail to Ruth Thalia's story, but she would later change her mind and told these people that her daughter was the contestant from The Value of the Truth. And as soon as she mentioned that, people were interested. They wanted to share the case on their channel. And the evening news came on that night. And Vilma was heartbroken. Rather than saying, Ruth Thalia was a university student or the very first contestant on The Value of the Truth, the news anchor referred to her as the prostitute from The Value of the Truth. So this was very, very bittersweet for the family. This was a devastating description of their loved one, but at the same time, her story was finally out there. Days of pounding the pavement and trying to get people to listen had paid off, and their daughter's name was being spread around, so hopefully they could find her. And almost instantly, the story changed. All of these news stations wanted to be involved in this story, but the channel ATV had initially agreed to air the family story, so they kind of thought that they had a claim to them, if you will. They would follow Ruth Thalia's family everywhere. They even would stay at their house with someone there around the clock. Now, the family was put out by this, but ATV had many resources that they did not. They could help look for leads. They could loan their cars to the family so they could search, morgues and hospitals. And they even had arranged a trip for Ruth Thalia's parents to go meet with an advisor to the First Lady of Peru. While this is going on, the family is constantly being bombarded with, false leads and extortion attempts. One day, a taxi driver arrived at their front door and said that he knew where Ruth Thalia was and he would take them to her for 2,000 sols. And Vilma and Leoncio were excited because they were going to get their daughter back. They were going to find her and bring her home where she belonged. So Leoncio went with this taxi driver, and when they arrived at the hotel, he soon realized that it was not his daughter. And he told the girl to go home before returning home himself. So while Ruth Thalia's family is doing everything in their power to find their loved one, every single person has someone in mind that they think could be connected to this disappearance. And it's the same someone. Everyone thinks that Brian knows what happened to Ruth Thalia. And unfortunately, Brian's behavior really doesn't help his case at all. A few days after Ruth Thalia's disappearance, he actually sells his taxi. And then he moves out of the room that he is renting. And then investigators in this case find a witness. So according to a minor in the neighborhood, Brian was actually on the lookout for Ruth Thalia on the night of September 11th. And he had even offered this boy 50 sols to alert him to when Ruth Thalia got off this bus, which I'm guessing he did. It never specifically said, but the boy would go on to say that he saw Brian and an unknown male shove Ruth Thalia into the back of Brian's taxi before taking off. And this was all of the information that investigators had until September 22nd, when everything in this case would change. So on the morning of September 22nd, Brian actually would do an interview with a reporter from ATV where she had asked if he had seen Ruth Thalia, and he said that he couldn't remember because he was drunk that night, but that his conscience is clean. Later that afternoon, Leoncio receives a phone call from Channel 9 saying that police had found the body of a young woman on the outskirts of Lima. She was actually found in a well where she was covered in rocks and concrete, and this well was on the property of Rady Leyva, Brian's uncle. So immediately Leoncio and Eva rush to the property, but when they get there, things are blocked off. They are completely swarmed by the media, and they couldn't get in for over an hour. So then the news finally broke, And the body in the well was, in fact, 19-year-old Ruth Thalia Sayas Sanchez. And the media was right there to capture Ava and Leoncio's grief. So a reporter by the name of Mary Bell Toledo was instructed to go to the family home and speak to Vilma, get the story first. But when she arrived there, Vilma was still holding on to hope. She didn't know that her daughter had been found. So Mary Bell called her producer and said, "Are you sure it's Ruth Thalia?" And he said, "We are dead sure. Brian confessed." Mary Bell broke the news to Vilma, who was understandably very upset. She ran upstairs to her room and locked herself in, where you could just hear this wailing coming from her bedroom. And Mary Bell and her cameraman were standing on the landing, just shocked, staring at each other. Her cameraman actually, motioned for her to go into the room, to knock on the door and try and gain access so they could get this on film. But Mary Bell said no. And shortly after this, she would stop working in television news. So on the evening of Saturday, September 22nd, all of the channels in the area are displaying the coverage of Ruth Thalia's case, except one, and that would have been Frecuencia Latina, and they were sticking to their usual programming that evening. They were airing the value of the truth. So Brian begins his taped confession. He says on the evening of September 11th, he called Ruth Thalia and she agreed to meet up with him. So he waited for her near the bus stop where she got into his car, and then they went and got some cheap wine. They would take it back to Brian's house and drink a little bit outside in the street before going up to his room. They would have sexual relations, and then Ruth Thalia began to insult him, saying that she didn't know what she was doing with a taxi driver and that he was a poor idiot. And at this point, Brian lost it and began choking Ruth Thalia, and says he did this for at least 30 seconds. He thought that she had just lost consciousness, but when he checked, he couldn't hear her heartbeat, and he panicked and put Ruth Thalia in his bathroom before leaving the house. This is all that I was able to find on Brian's confession, but we do know that after this, he enlisted the help of his uncle and moved Ruth Thalia's body to where it was eventually found. And then, as mentioned earlier, a few days later, he would sell his taxi. So the police had their culprit. He confessed, but there was one major question. Was this a premeditated homicide, or was this a crime of passion? Brian's lawyer did indeed try to prove that it was a crime of passion, and even petitioned to have Beto come in and testify, believing he should take responsibility in the events that led to Ruth Thalia's death. However, on February 27th of 2014, the court concluded that the eyewitness testimony and Brian's actions were not those of someone who got carried away in the moment. Rather, he planned this and was therefore sentenced under the charge of murder, where he and his uncle both received life sentences. The court determined that the motive for this tragedy was a robbery. They wanted Ruth Thalia's winnings from the value of the truth. So Ruth Thalia's family would go on to give an interview after the sentencing came in, and they did agree that justice had been served. But when asked a little bit more in detail, Vilma replied, quote, "When I die, that's when I will stop crying. That's when I will stop suffering," unquote. It took the family a very, very long time to begin the healing process. Vilma, who sang in the band where her husband played the harp, did not sing for many, many years until her daughter Ava actually convinced her this is not what Ruth Thalia would have wanted. She would have wanted you to be happy and to find some joy. And Vilma began singing again. She still does have a photo of Ruth Thalia in her bedroom. It is the first thing that she sees in the morning and the last thing that she sees at night, and even talks to the photo and tells Ruth Thalia how the family is doing, what's going on, things like that, to try and stay connected to her daughter. So The Valley of the Truth would go on to have 3 more seasons, but after the first season, the format changed. So rather than having everyday contestants come in, they brought in celebrity contestants instead, people who were more accustomed to public scrutiny. So that is the story of Ruth Thalia Sayas Sanchez and the cost of the truth. I want to know what you guys think of this case down in the comments below. I want to thank you so much for listening to her story today. And if you have any case recommendations, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I would love to check them out and present you guys with more cases. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.